that imminent election has drawn comparisons with Vicky Pollard. Yeah, but no, but yeah, but no, but yeah. What are they actually going to do this week? I'm joined by the Shadow Home Secretary, Diane Abbott. Diane Abbott, welcome. You heard Jo Swinson just now talking about this one-line bill coming in on Tuesday. What is Labour's attitude to it?
Labour's attitude to an election is we are up for an election. We have over 500,000 members and they want an election. I don't think any of us believe that Boris Johnson should be in power for a minute longer than is necessary. Jo Swinson's bill, we haven't had the chance to discuss it with her or the SNP. We saw it about the same time that you saw it. We'll discuss it with her. What is problematic about the bill is not necessarily the notion of an election on the 9th of December. It's that the bill is calling on the EU to give us an extension. We can't dictate to the EU what length of extension they want to give. We have to hear from them.
So, to be absolutely clear, because the expectation now after the publication of this bill is that the EU will grant an extension until the end of January the 31st. If that happens, and this bill is down on the floor of the House of Commons, there is no reason for Labour not to vote for it. You know, you avoid what you consider crashing out without a deal, because there's a delay until the end of January, and you get the election that you say you want. What's the problem?
There's a big if in that. We need to know what sort of extension the EU is going to give. I mean, it would be a disaster for British industry and the country if we came out of the EU without a deal. For instance, look at security. We've got those awful events in Essex with those 39 migrants who died in the back of a lorry. If we crash out without a deal, we'd have no access to the European arrest warrant, we'd have no access to Europol, we'd have no access to all sorts of important databases. We cannot crash out of the EU without a deal, and Labour will do anything in its power to stop that.
I want to come on to those other subjects in a moment, but just to go back to this, if, to be absolutely clear, if the EU says the extension lasts until the end of January, does Labour back this bill?
We're waiting to see what the EU says, but make no mistake, Labour Party members, over 500,000 of them, and the Labour Party is up for an election.
If you're up for an election, you should back the bill. There's no getting around it.
No, because the danger would be that we come out of the EU without it. And I've said to you, even just looking at security, that would be disastrous.
Yeah, but when you say, you've said again and again, that you will back an election as soon as no deal is taken off the table. What do you mean by taken off? Do you mean forever, or for a few months, or because if it's forever, then there's no chance of an election for a long time anyway.
We need to know what sort of extension the EU is granting, because everything turns on that.
But that doesn't take no deal off the table, does it? Because if they grant an extension to the end of January, we could have no deal then. I mean, the two things are different, aren't they?
They are different, but first and foremost, we've said it over and over again, we need to know what sort of extension the EU is granting. When we know that, we'll consider Boris's proposal.
Sorry, but I'm asking a different question. I'm asking what you mean as a party when you say we will have an election once no deal is taken off the table. To put it another way, what would the Prime Minister have to do to get the Labour Party to support an election?
Well, he could come to Parliament and categorically give Parliament undertaking that he's not going to come out without a deal. But he won't do that. Because coming out without a deal is something that people around like Dominic Cummings would want, because then it becomes not just Brexit, but a Trump Brexit, opening up the British economy to American multinationals. But if he were to come to Parliament and unequivocally say that he's not going to crash out without a deal, we'd be satisfied with that.
Because to a lot of people watching, it seems that the Labour Party keeps saying we want an election and then finds a reason not to actually vote for an election. Let me remind you of what your leader said. Jeremy Corbyn said before the so-called Ben Act for the extension. This is what he told the House of Commons.
I repeat what I said last night. Let this bill pass and gain royal assent, then we will back an election so we do not crash out with a no-deal exit from the European Union.
The bill has passed, it has got royal assent, and yet you're not calling for an election.
As I said to you, we can't take the risk of having an election and then, because Parliament isn't sitting in the period of that election, we crash out on the 31st.
So we could be in a very, very difficult and strange position here, which is the EU is waiting to determine the length of the extension by looking at what Parliament's going to do, and Parliament is looking at the EU, waiting to what the EU is going to do. And between the two, nothing happens, which is why the people are getting really, really frustrated with this.
Yeah, but that's how the media is presenting it. It is reasonable for Parliament to wait for the EU to make a decision about the extension.
I mean, I was quoting Jeremy Corbyn, which is perhaps unfair. Let me quote somebody else. Let me quote Diane Abbott. At the time of the Tory leadership election, you said that all of these people, whoever becomes leader of the Conservative Party, won't have a majority. They won't be able to deliver Brexit. You're quite right about all of that. And therefore, we need a general election. Those things have transpired, and yet we're still not getting a general election.
Because of the threat of no deal, the threat to security, apart from the threat to business and industry. And we wouldn't be a serious national party if we didn't take those threats seriously.
But how do you get rid of this? I mean, this is the problem. How do you get rid of the threat of no deal? The only way to do it is either to pass a deal, and the only deal on offer is Boris Johnson's deal, or else, I suppose, to revoke Article 50. And yet neither of those things are proposed.
Well, one way of doing it would be for Boris Johnson to come to the floor of the House and give the House of Commons a commitment that whatever happens, he will not take Britain out of the EU without a deal.
So if he came to the House of Commons tomorrow and said, assuming that we've got an extension until the 31st of January and an election, I can absolutely promise I don't try and crash out before that. You would vote for that?
If
Liberal?
he said clearly and unequivocally that I will not take Britain out of the EU without a deal, I think not just the Labour Party would be satisfied, a lot of Labour MPs, a lot of Conservative MPs would be satisfied. Let's wait to see if he does that.